Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Card Combo Show with me, Chocobilly, where I look at the weird and wonderful card combinations in the Final Fantasy TCG. This week, I'm going to be looking at Zidane from Opus 14, Layle from Opus 16, Leviathan from Opus 16, Kam'lanaut from Opus 14, and finally Lakshmi from Opus 14. Right, first up we have Zidane, a 2CP 6k water wind forward with the text, Zidane cannot be blocked. When Zidane deals damage to your opponent, choose up to one forward, return to its owner's hand. And then Steel S, which is an S and one wind, your opponent reveals their hand. Select one card from their hand, your opponent removes it from the game. You can cast it as though you owned it this turn, you can only use this ability during your turn. So, obviously the idea is they can't be blocked, you bounce something and then you steal said card that got bounced and then you can play it as well, which is quite nice. However, you require color fixing, and Tyro is obviously a good answer for that, but being that it's Earth and Zidane is Wind Water, it means that you're probably going to be in something like Wind Earth, and then you use something like Tyro or Shantoto to be able to color fix for the water in Zidane, and then you can also color fix for the card that Zidane steals as well. Tross. So when a forward opponent controls is returned from the field to its owner's hand, draw one card. This effect will trigger once per turn. So Zidane attacks, deals point damage, bounces a forward, gets you a card. Nice and simple. Leviathan. So a 2-for-1 deal here. You get to bounce something when Zidane deals a point of damage, at which point you then get to deal minus 9,000 to something else as well. So a nice way to be able to get rid of two forwards your opponent has on the field. Kimari. So Zidane is good and he can kind of sneak under your opponent's forwards, but he's very easy to kill. He's only 6k power. So realistically, playing Kimari onto the field to make it so that Zidane can not be dealt damage to summons or abilities is really useful. And obviously your opponent can use something like Kuchaspel, or just blank either of them, but at the end of the day, anything they have to do that makes it cost more for them to get rid of Zidane is ultimately probably a good thing. Now, if you throw something like Auron into the mix, then it immediately means that your opponent has to target Auron before they can get rid of Zidane. Now, you can use Kimari on either Auron or Zidane. Either way is pretty good because they have to account for the fact that they can't use damage effects on Auron, or they have to use something like Kuchaspel again. But yeah, making it so they have to go through the process of getting rid of Auron first before getting rid of Zidane. And it might be a case that actually use Kimari on Zidane because they can get rid of Auron, fair enough, but then they still have to get rid of Zidane and he still has that protection, so maybe they could only do it the once with the Auron anyway. Chalenka. So yeah, I mean, Zidane can attack and not be blocked, so have him attack twice, and you get to bounce potentially two things as well, which with Tross is still only one card, but if it's something like Leviathan on the field, then you get to minus 9k one thing, or just minus 9k twice basically. And Tidus. Yep, Tidus can't be blocked either. He also has his nice inbuilt protection as well. So yeah, just having two forwards on the field that cannot be blocked, and one of which can actually get rid of one of the forwards on the field as well, meaning that you can then make way for other forwards to come through, is horrible. So yeah, having these two forwards which are either small and hard to get rid of, or not hard to get rid of, but yeah, small, or just Tidus has his own inbuilt protection which can also then remove another forward anyway, yeah, it's just a horrible situation for your opponent to have to face. Right, next up we have Layle, who is a 5CP 8k earth forward with the text, Brave. All forwards must attack once per turn if possible, and then all forwards must block if possible. And then discard one card, Layle gains 1000 power until the end of the turn. So he's one of these cool cards that kind of changes the way a game would work, basically, because everything has to attack, everything has to block. However, you do get cards that have text written on them saying this forward cannot attack or cannot block, at which point Layle doesn't affect them at all. So something like Vayne is obviously really good, really useful because of the fact that you can play Vayne even in a mono Earth deck as well. So you just put two active backups into the break zone, play Vayne onto the field for free. Then all your forwards are plus 2k, whilst all their forwards are minus 2k. All their forwards have to block, you attack with yours, their forwards will probably die, yours will survive. Really, really good. Tama. So this is a fun little combat trick. So let's say you've already built up your wall, you've got all these massive forwards, and your opponent can't quite get through that wall. So what they do is they just, in their main phase one, I don't know, play a forward, and then they try to end their turn. What you can do is, for your opponent to end their turn, you have to go through every phase of the game. So you have to go through main phase 1, then the attack phase, and then main phase 2. And with the changing of phases, there's also a passing of priority. So when your opponent says, well, I'm just going to pass my turn then, actually what you can say is, hang on a minute, let's go back to the end of your main phase 1. When the priority passes to me, I'm going to break Tama, pay 5, and then bring Layle onto the field. Now, when your opponent goes through their attack phase, which they have to do, they then have to attack with all their forwards. You have to block as well, but hopefully you'll be playing this in a situation where all their forwards are smaller than yours, so when they have to attack those forwards, they all die and all your forwards stay alive. So yeah, it's a horrible situation for your opponent to have to face on the fly without even knowing it, which, to be honest, would make it worth probably just throwing one Layle into a mono earth deck just for fun, because at the end of the day, that is something that not many people would anticipate, and it's, yeah, just really, really awkward. And the good thing about it as well is that if you break your Tama and then your opponent does something, they play a summon or something like that, which actually makes it so that their forwards would kill yours, you don't have to play Layle. You can actually play anything else or any other characters from your hand, because Tama says play one character of cost, or one character card of cost X or less from your hand onto the field. If you are at 5 backups, even if Tama's broken, you can now play another backup. Similarly, you can play another forward as well. So yeah, it might be a case that actually playing Layle isn't the best thing to do, at which point to play something else, because so long as it's 5 or less, you're good. Geomancer. So this is kind of funny. So let's say your opponent's at 6 points of damage, but they've got forwards down, and with Layle on the field, you're actually never going to be able to deal them that final point of damage because they have to block. So you can actually use Geomancer to make it so that forward can't block, because Layle's text is all forwards must block if possible, but Geomancer makes it so they can't block, so it's not possible for it to block, so it won't block. So yeah, you can use Geomancer to make it so that you can get that final point of damage through if you would rather, and you can also use it to save your own forwards as well. So maybe your opponent's got a bigger forward than you do, they attack with theirs, you can use Geomancer to make it so your own forward can't block, at which point it won't. Kam'lanaut. Now this is a fun card that hasn't played for quite a while, but I actually quite like it. So if Kam'lanaut receives damage during your opponent's turn, reduce the damage by 4,000 instead. And then when Kam'lanaut enters the field, we don't care about that second ability, so never worry about that. But yeah, basically it means that your opponent has to attack because you've got Layle on the field. You block with Kam'lanaut, and he takes 4k less damage every single turn. So yeah, unless your opponent is dealing significant damage, and to be honest, 9k forwards are up there anyway. I mean, by that I mean there are a lot of 9k forwards out there now, but still, it's something for your opponent to have to face off, and obviously you may not play Layle on the field with Kam'lanaut if your opponent does have some big forwards anyway. But if you throw in something like Heretical Knight Garland, so then you give Kam'lanaut plus 4,000 and Brave, it now means that Kam'lanaut is a standard 9k, so your opponent has to deal 13,000 damage to Kam'lanaut to be able to break him, and that's in one instance of damage as well. And not to mention the fact that Kam'lanaut can attack every turn with Brave, so it'll be ready to block the following turn. Just bear in mind the fact that on your turn, Kam'lanaut does not get the damage reducing effects. It's only on your opponent's turn, so if your opponent has a 9k forward and you attack with Kam'lanaut, Kam'lanaut will die, unfortunately. And Minwu, obviously. You combine Minwu with that previous little combo, then you've got a forward that's going to be very, very hard to kill through damage. Obviously, fire, Kuchaspul, but, you know, that's just the way the game is. But yeah, Minwu making it so that all your forwards don't receive damage less than their power. It means that if your opponent has to attack with all their forwards, they're all smaller than just one forward you control, that forward can block every single attack and be perfectly fine. Titan, yeah, so it might be a case that your opponent has forwards bigger than you have, and they're like, well, I'm going to attack because I have to attack, but I'm going to kill your forwards anyway. Cast Titan, your forward then becomes, well, if it's Layle, 18k power, because Titan can give something plus 10,000, which is insane. And then obviously with Minwu, it means it actually takes no damage whatsoever. So your opponent would have to deal 18,000 damage in one go. There are not many cards in this game that can deal 18,000 power in a single hit. I mean, I'm sure there is ones out there somewhere, but either way, that's quite amusing. Preesh. So when Preesh blocks, Preesh gains plus 4,000 power until the end of the turn, and that's every single time she blocks. So your opponent attacks with a few forwards, Preesh, block, gains plus 4,000, block again, gains another 4,000, and it'll just keep on going up and up and up. If you have Minwu on the field, then obviously Preesh won't take any additional damage, but she'll keep on getting bigger, which is horrible for your opponent. And you can also give her Brave through Earth as well, so it means that you can attack with her to potentially kill one of your opponent's forwards, or maybe they don't have any forwards, but she's still there to block on the following turn as well. Marsh. Now this is a really strange one. So Marsh's text is dull 1 active forward. Choose 1 forward, blocking Marsh. Deal it damage equal to the power of the dull forward. So let's say your opponent has a 9k forward and you have a 9k forward and you have Marsh. Now, you could attack with a 9k forward. Well, actually, you also have Layle on the field as well, so sorry. But you attack with a 9k forward, they have to block with their 9k forward. Both your forwards die. Not great. What you could do is attack with Marsh. That forward has to block, but then you can dull the active 9k forward to deal 9k to their 9k forward and kill it. At which point Marsh will survive, and so will your 9k forward, and theirs is dead. Now, this, you can kind of see this as like a party attack, but even in party attack, one of your forwards would die. So this way you at least make sure that you are killing the forward. Just be mindful of the fact that if that forward has, you know, some damage mitigation abilities, then this probably won't work, but still a funny little combo and a way to be able to use Marsh, which never gets played. And finally, Ravana, Savior of the Nath. What a card. And to be honest, Lightning works really well with Layle, because Lightning has a lot of damage reducing abilities, power reducing abilities, a lot of first strike, and something like Ravana. So if Ravana, Savior of the Nath, is dealt damage, reduce the damage by 5,000 instead. Let's say your opponent has 3 forwards on the field, each of them 9k. You attack with Ravana, their first one has to block, it dies, Ravana stands back up, attack again, kill that one, attack again, kill that one. Now obviously Ravana takes 5,000 less if they're 9ks, that would be, the third attack would then end up killing Ravana, but you just throw Minwu into the mix as well, which in Earth is very easy to do. You can either Tama onto the field, or you can use Luca to bring onto the field as well. But either way, having it so that Ravana can just keep on attacking and surviving, having all this damage reduced, and yeah, it basically means with Ravana on the field, if your opponent has like even a couple of forwards, they're all going to die, and you're probably going to get opponent damage through as well, which is just horrible. Right, Leviathan. So I've been waiting a long time for a card like this, and I'm happy it's come about, and I quite like it, to be honest. So it's a 4 CP water summoner. Choose 1 forward of cost 5 or less. Put it at the top or bottom of its owner's deck. If the cost to cast a Leviathan was paid with CP of 3 or more different elements, also draw 1 card, then discard 1 card from your hand. So Zidane, yeah, fairly obvious. You cast Leviathan to put your opponent's forward on top of their deck. You then play Zidane, and you get to steal said card and then potentially cast it as well. So it's quite horrible. And also, casting the Leviathan is 1 cast. If you can then cast something else and then play Zidane, Zidane will also gain haste as well. Tidus. So this is a weird little combo. So what you can do is cast Leviathan on your own Tidus, at which point Tidus will be put into the deck, and that will trigger his effect to then draw you 3 cards. If you've also paid 3 elements for your Leviathan, you also get to draw as well. So you would actually cast Leviathan, put Tidus on top of your deck, which would trigger Tidus' effect, but also fully resolving Leviathan, draw Tidus to your hand as well. And now, even though Tidus has technically gone from your deck, gone from the field to the deck to your hand, that still triggers Tidus' effect, at which point you get to draw 3 cards. So you've now drawn a total of 4 cards, which isn't too bad. Now obviously Tidus being on the field is generally better, but it does mean that if you are looking for a specific card, or there's something you really need, then getting that card to your hand through drawing 4 cards might be worth it. Although I say you really are only drawing 3 cards because of the fact that Leviathan is going to be drawing the Tidus that you got. Also, yeah, paying 3 elements in mono water, water, wind maybe, yeah, kind of awkward, but still kind of funny. Now, Mog 6, you throw that into the mix and things start getting interesting. So Mog 6, if you've drawn 4 cards in this turn, you get to bounce a forward at the end of the turn. If you've drawn 6 cards at the end of the turn, you get to break a forward every turn. Now, those 6 or 4 cards include the 2 cards you draw at the beginning of your turn, so really you only have to draw 2 or 4. And with Tidus and Leviathan, you can easily draw 4. At which point Mog will then break something. So what you could be doing really is play Tidus onto the field, and also be careful of milling yourself out with this, but play Tidus onto the field, and then use Leviathan to put Tidus back on the deck, then draw to your hand, and then draw 3 cards, get to break something, and then next turn play Tidus onto the field, and then cast Leviathan and whatever, and just keep doing it. Now obviously recasting Leviathan will be the most awkward thing. Replaying Tidus is fine, I guess, but it's actually not, because you know you have to pay 3 every single time. But if you're getting to break something, that's quite amusing. And also, you know, you really want to be attacking with Tidus as well, given the fact that he can't be blocked. So you want to be playing him in the same turn that you've bounced him back to your hand. So the order would go attack with Tidus, bounce him back to your hand, playing it back onto the field. Your following turn, you attack with him again. So that way, obviously, he is able to attack. It's not the most efficient thing in the world, but it's funny, and that's what I do. Golbers. So similar sort of thing here, but at the beginning of your attack phase, during each of your turns, reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a forward, of course, 3 or less, you may play it onto the field. So obviously, it's 3 or less, and as you know, the cost of a card goes down, generally so does the effectiveness of their entry abilities. But using something like Leviathan on, let's say, I don't know, a Viking might be worth it. You cast Leviathan, put it on top of your deck, it's left the field, so you get to draw yourself a card, and then Golbez, oh look, it's our Viking, bring it back onto the field, draw yourself another card, which again is best for kind of milling yourself, but that's it really. But it doesn't have to be just that as well. There could be some other cool cards as well. So, for example, you could use that alongside something like the Opus 15, I think it's 15, Lena, which can pay crystals and then play things out of the break zone. So if you're casting Leviathan to put her back to then play it back onto the field for free with Golbez, that's not the worst thing if you have the crystals to be able to do so. And again, there's lots of different cards that can do similar sorts of things as well. And Omega. So at the end of each player's turn, Omega gains a counter, and if he already has a counter, he'll just deal opponent damage. So you'd play Omega on your turn, and then at the end of the turn, gains a counter, and then at the end of your opponent's turn, it would use said counter to then deal your opponent damage. So at the end of your opponent's turn, what you do is cast Leviathan to put forward their control on top of their deck, then Omega deals them a point of damage, at which point it was the forward that was on the field is now gone into damage. And to be honest, that's probably even more effective than remove from game, because there's one card in the game which allows you to retrieve something from damage. There's only 2 cards in the game that actually interact with the damage at all, which was Axstar and Larsa. No one plays Larsa, and very few people play Axstar. So it's maybe a good way to really, truly get rid of that forward. Right, Kam'lanaut. So a 4 CP 8k ice forward with the text, when Kam'lanaut enters the field or attacks, choose 1 dull forward opponent controls, deal 2000 damage for each ice backup you control. And then Light Blade, which is S, and 2 ice, choose 1 forward, deal 2000 damage for each ice character you control. So yeah, it can be very powerful if you've got lots of ice backups. So Vayne, now this is an interesting one. So actually there are lots of high cost cards played these days that aren't that high in power. So for example, things like Marsh or Luso. And yeah, make it so that they can't become active means that they are always at threat with Kam'lanaut, and they will never become active, not to mention the fact that when Vayne gets played onto the field, they go dull anyway. So yeah, super powerful. So you can just play Vayne onto the field, maybe they've got 2/5 costs, you then attack with Kam'lanaut, kill their, I don't know, Cecil after paying the 2, and then, you know, their other forward won't stand back up, which means that it's ready to be killed by Kam'lanaut in the second turn. Kefka. So, 2 cards that absolutely love having lots of ice backups. So, when Kefka enters the field, choose 1 forward opponent controls, dull it. That's already fine because then Kam'lanaut can kill said forward. But also, you can dull Kefka, choose 1 forward, dull it and freeze it. If you can only use this ability if you control 5 or more ice backups. So Kam'lanaut will be dealing 10k on attack or entry with that as well. But also, Kefka can just dull and freeze something out of the way, which is really powerful. Kislex, so another card that really likes having lots of ice backups. But yeah, so at the beginning of your main phase 2, during each of your turns, you may play 1 forward of cost equal to or less than the number of ice backups you control from your hand onto the field. Kislex can actually play cards of any element onto the field, which is really good. But yeah, being able to just attack with Kam'lanaut, probably 10k something, and then Crystal Exarch bring out potentially a 5 CP forward onto the field is really powerful and a massive swing in your favour when your opponent's losing their forwards while still just gaining them for free effectively. Dr. Sid. Now this is a bit of a strange one because Dr. Sid isn't really played that much, but backup breaking abilities are played a bit more these days. So when a backup you control is broken by your opponent's summons or abilities, your opponent puts 1 character from their field into the break zone. So maybe they're running something like Garland, which breaks a forward and a backup, or just a 4 CP Alexander that can break a character of 4 CP or more. Making it so that your opponent has to sack off a character, even if they can afford to do so, at least turns things a bit more in your favour. Just if it is Garland, probably not the best because they'll be breaking 2 backups, probably, because they'll break their own backup through Sid's effect, at which point they get 2 cards to hand, but still, it just means that you kind of keep things a bit more even. And it also deters your opponent from wanting to break their backups or your backups as well, even though Kam'lanaut is there. So they have to kind of weigh up the odds. Zeramus. So the effect that everyone forgets about is that at the end of each of your opponent's turns, dull all the forwards your opponent controls. So yeah, they'll forget about it. all their forwards go dull, and then Kam'lanaut can attack and just kill the forward anyway. Nice. Eeld Marsh. So yeah, I mean, these cards didn't even really get played that much when they were released, but if you control a card named Kam'lanaut, the cost for playing Eeld Marsh onto the field is reduced by 2, so it then becomes a 3 CP 9k forward, which in and of itself is perfectly fine. But then when it enters the field, you can also choose a character your opponent controls and dull it, and that's pretty good because it is a character you can dull out. So maybe you've frozen a character through something like Zaramus, and then you play Eeld Marsh, you then get to dull it, so then it's become dull and frozen. And then at damage 5, when Eeld Marsh enters the field, choose up to 3 characters your opponent controls and dull them, so monsters or whatever, it doesn't matter. And that's actually really powerful. To be able to potentially dull 4 things on entry is really strong. Maybe you're in Wind Ice and you have something like Hope on the field, so then they become frozen as well. Oh boy, that is quite the swing. And then not forgetting that Kam'lanaut will probably be able to kill one of those things as well. And last but not least, we have Lakshmi, Lady of Bliss. So if you have 5 or more cards in your hand, Lakshmi, Lady of Bliss gains Lakshmi is dealt damage, reduce the damage by 2000 instead, and at the end of each of your turns, draw 1 card and choose a 4 CP 7k water forward. Mog 6, yeah, so just being able to draw more cards to your hand is always good. Now, what is interesting about Mog 6 is Mog 6's text is, at the end of each of your turns, choose up to 1 forward other than Mog 6. During this turn, if you have drawn 4 or more cards, return to its owner's hand. If you've drawn 6 or more cards, put it into the break zone instead. So Mog 6 will always trigger at the end of a turn, provided your opponent has a forward to choose. So it doesn't matter at that point how many cards you've actually drawn. So let's say you've drawn your 2, as I said earlier, those 2 count towards Mog 6's ability. So you've drawn your 2, and then you've drawn another card through another ability, and then you go to pass your turn, Mog will trigger, so will Lakshmi. What you do is you stack it so that Mog stacks first, and then Lakshmi. Lakshmi will resolve, draw you a card, Mog will resolve, and when Mog triggers, you actually have to make the choice then of the forward you're choosing, but still that doesn't matter. Mog will then resolve, check how many cards you've drawn this turn, which is 4, you then get to bounce something, which is super cool to be honest. Bismarck, so again, more stacking things. You can not have drawn anything during your turn, well, aside from the 2 you do to start your turn, and then you go to end your turn, and you've got Mog stack, Lakshmi stack, Bismarck stack. Bismarck, put something back into your hand, and then you get to draw a card. Lakshmi, draw another card, and then Mog will check, yep, you have drawn 4 cards this turn, bounce something. Now, you do need to be mindful of that, because obviously the more things you're bouncing back to your hand at the end of the turn, even if you have 5 cards in hand and only Lakshmi triggers, you put yourself to 6, you then have to discard down. Even though it's the end of turn phase, you still have to fall within that limit of only 5 cards in hand. And then just to throw even more, fuel on the fire, Tross as well. So this is quite amusing. You draw your 2 at the beginning of your turn, you then have Lakshmi draw you a card, Bismarck bounce something back to your hand and draw you a card, and then potentially Tross has also had some effect. Oh no, that's right. At which point you can then bounce something with Mog, and then that will trigger Tross, who will then draw you another card. So you have just got, in your end phase alone, 4 cards to your hand. Through Lakshmi drawing you something, Bismarck bouncing something back to your hand, and then drawing you a card off of that fact. Then Mog bouncing something of your opponent, which then Tross gets you something to your hand as well. So yeah, make sure you only have 1 card when you go to your end phase with these guys on the field. Obviously this is, when the planets align and you have these 3 forwards and monster on the field, but either way that's quite amusing. And being able to just play stuff and then go to end turn and get 4 cards to hand is quite nice. Right. Zidane. So if you have 6 or more cards in your hand, Zidane cannot be blocked, and then when Zidane deals damage to your opponent, draw 2 cards. So these 2 work nicely together, because obviously Lakshmi draws you cards to hand at the end of your turn, which means when you go into your next turn, you're more likely to have 6 cards in hand for Zidane to not be able to be blocked. But then also Zidane will get you cards when he deals damage, which means that Lakshmi will be able to keep her protective ability online as well. Where are I? So at the end of each of your turns, if your opponent has discarded a card due to your summons or abilities, draw a card. So just another way to be able to draw cards at the end of your turn. Lakshmi, where are I? 2 cards to hand. Again, you could be running Moogle 6 with this as well. Mog 6, sorry, with this as well. So you then get the prerequisite bounce. And in Ice, it's very, very easy to make your opponent discard now with things like Biblos and Orphan and Scaletoad and whatever. Remora. So choose 1 forward, draw 1 card, then until the end of the turn, it loses 2,000 power for each of cards in your hand. So it might be a case that you just passed your turn, and Lakshmi draws you your 5th card and cast Remora on your opponent's turn. You've got probably 6 cards, well, not 6 cards, because Remora will have been one of those cards, but Remora will get you a card to hand. But either way, unless you've got Yuna on the field and you're paying with all your backups, all 5 of your backups, chances are you will have just 5 cards in hand. But that's still really good, because that is, you know, still minus 10k to something, which is really, really good. But yeah, you can also use that in your opponent's during your phase as well, because Lakshmi just keeps your hand size up, which means when you do cast Remora, it's even more effective. And finally, Leviathan, because it's just a 1 CP summon that can bounce something, but it's what it can bounce is based on the amount of cards in your hand. So, you know, just leaving 1 backup open to be able to cast Leviathan, and Lakshmi draws you something at the end of your turn. On your opponent's turn, you can probably bounce anything you wanted to, because Lakshmi is going to constantly be getting those cards to be able to bounce things. Oh yeah, sorry, I said finally. Quina, because for each card in hand, Quina gains plus 1,000 power. Enough said, really. Oh, there we go, folks. We are slowly creeping over the hill towards Opus 17. We haven't had any spoilers yet, but I'm looking forward to it. There's been a lot of discussion in the fandom recently about things like Falca and Mashery, and I have to be careful how I phrase this. My take on this game is that it is becoming an efficiency war. Now, it always kind of was, because so long as you can kill your opponent's things quicker or easier than they can kill yours, you're winning. But there are a lot of cards in the game now which have either a pay 0 ability, or you just discard something to be able to make something happen. And some are limited, so you've got things like Porum and Palom, which are pay 0, but they can use it once per turn, which is fair enough, because that would be bonkers if they weren't. But then you've got things like Falca, which is just discard a card, discard a card, discard a card, discard a card, keep bouncing things, keep reactivating things, you know, whatever. And that then funds something like Mashery, who can then just put things into the break zone. So yeah, you are technically discarding for Mashery's effect, but the fact that you're getting something useful off of, I mean, the Ladies and Tentacles, or whatever the deck is called, is proof of how effective that sort of thing can be. But you've also got cards like Braska, where it's just discard a card, deal 7k to something. Not that that card is played particularly much, but you then look at stuff like Kingsglaives or Avalanche, where everything is just based on, I'm making something cost 1 CP and play onto the field. And it's starting to run rampant within the fandom. Now, I know a lot of people might complain about something, how soirees are really powerful, but it's good to have something like that within the, like, every couple of opuses or so, because it's a nice little self-contained package which is strong, but ultimately it's not too powerful, I don't think, because at the London Re-Raise event there was a lot of soirees, yes, but none of them came top cut. So, at the end of the day, how effective is it really? I mean, it depends a lot on what you build around it, sure. But really, something being, like, nicely self-contained, I think, isn't the worst thing. But either way, the thing that I worry about with this game is the fact that you can do so much for so little, and your opponent has very little that they can do about it as well. Storm, for example, it's very uninteractive. You aren't doing much to your opponent's field directly. So you might have something like Barrel Eye, which, yeah, is obviously directly attacking everything, but it's only a, like, side effect of you actually just reactivating your stuff. It's just even more efficient. And whilst as a personal lover of wind used to be my jam, but as it's become more and more powerful at being able to bounce things back into the deck, or draw you even more cards and reactivating everything, and then dealing loads of damage to your opponent's board and all these sorts of things, I start to like it less, because it just becomes a little too powerful on its own. Now, that's nothing to say about Fire. Fire used to be trash, now it is very powerful. But Fire, I don't think has the same problem, because it isn't always working on efficiency. Even though, you know, most of the ways it's killing things are fairly efficient. It doesn't have too many pay 0 effects. It doesn't have too many things getting reduced. The only real cards I can think of are maybe something like Rain, the 6 CP, which can be reduced to 1 potentially. But yeah, that's just my take on things anyway. I just think that not too many things should have pay 0 effects. Like Atomos and Tross, for example, I think they should actually be monsters where you have to pay an element to make them a forward. Because, especially Atomos, because it can attack and reactivate everything. So yeah, and Tross similarly, you're bouncing something and getting a card to hand, and that also applies on your opponent's turn as well. I just think that to be able to make them forwards, they should have to pay. Anyway, that's just my take. You might think it's trash. Oh, who knows? But let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about the kind of current state of the game, and the way that things are so trending towards just efficiency war? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next video.